Hello, I'm Adam Fleming, host of the BBC's Daily News podcast. A few days ago, in the Newscast studio, I sat down to talk to Nicola Sturgeon. She's got her new autobiography out. It's called Frankly, and it covers her 8 years as First Minster of Scotland when she was dealing with Brexit, with COVID, with a whole host of political controversies. But it also talks in detail about the breakdown of her relationship with her former mentor and another former First Minister of Scotland, Alex Salmond, which was initially over how the Scottish Government dealt with claims of sexual harassment against him. But the book reveals was about so much more than that. But the book is also a really interesting read because it's about Nicola Sturgeon's relationship with herself as a politician in the public eye, as a person, as a powerful woman. So I hope you enjoy this really interesting conversation with the former First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon. Nicola Sturgeon, author, hello.
Hello.
Have you got used to that moniker yet?
No, I think it will take me quite some time. But I think it's probably my earliest ambition and longest standing ambition has been to write a book. So it's quite a special thing. Whatever people think about the book or whatever, for me to hold a book in my hands that I've written myself actually means a lot to me.
Also, do you have a novel in you? Because actually your big hobby was reading fiction.
I'd love to think I had a novel in me. The honest answer is I don't know. People, because I do read a lot of fiction, people ask me that question quite a lot. Are you going to write a novel? As if anybody can write a novel. And I've got a few friends who are authors.
Very successful novelists.
Yeah, the one you're thinking of. I'm always very careful not to kind of just assume that, of course, I can write a novel. It's an art form. It's a skill. I think I will give it a go at some point, but it may never see the light of day because it may be rubbish.
We shall see. I'm always intrigued how people actually get the words on the page. Like, did you do it longhand? Did you do it on a laptop? Did you have a vintage typewriter?
No, I did it on a laptop. I wrote it over 2 years, off and on. It wasn't, I wasn't writing every single day. And I found that writing first thing in the morning worked best, and so it was trial and error, I guess. I enjoyed the writing process. I mean, there were bits of it I didn't enjoy writing because they were quite hard, and also there's lots of it that I lived through it the first time, so writing it again, just I had to get it down. But I enjoyed it overall. I really enjoyed the editing process, and I thought that would be harder than it turned out to be. My first draft was like at least 50% longer than it had to be. So I thought getting it down to size was going to be almost impossible, but actually that was okay.
And did it turn out how you thought it would turn out, or did it really change? Did you really learn things about yourself as you were actually writing it?
I think I learned things about myself while I was writing it. I had wanted, and I guess everybody who sets out to write a book of this kind will say this, I wanted to write it, openly and candidly and not try to pretend that everything in my life or career had gone well, that I'd made mistakes. But I guess I wasn't sure how easy that would be or how I would find the process of that. It's also, I think it's broadly the kind of book I had in mind. But in some respects, I was trying to cover, obviously, my whole life, which is, quite a long time now. And, 30 years of a political career, covering quite momentous periods in recent history. So it was a lot to cram in. So I think inevitably there's parts of the book that are maybe higher level than I maybe originally anticipated that they would be.
I love the stuff in the early days when you're chapping doors, as we'd say in Glasgow, basically in my street probably, in Pollock Shields.
Definitely.
I don't remember because we were right at the top of the block, so you maybe didn't.
Oh no, I used to try the
Shields
tenements.
Road, Pollock Shields.
I think I've chapped probably every door on Shields Road.
It's a long road.
And some of these, the absolute bane of my life in the south side of Glasgow was the tenements that had 4 levels instead of 3.
We were three, so we made it easy for you. It is very refreshing that you are candid about the mistakes that you made. Like pretty much every single page, you're like, "Oh, I got this wrong."
Maybe I went too far.
Or I could have done this
Maybe
better.
I went too far.
And I think having read it yesterday and slept on it, I think to me it seems like there's 2 big mistakes you kind of sign up to in the recent past. And please correct me if I'm wrong here. One was how you handled the gender self ID in the closing bits of your time as First Minister, and also misjudging the mood of the Scottish people after Brexit and whether that meant they were up for another independence referendum.
I think that's
Am I right?
fair. Yeah, I think that's fair. I don't think I'm admitting that I got all of.
Oh no, totally.
Wrong,
No, sorry. Yeah, maybe admitting
yeah.
Mistakes amongst things that you also thought were correct.
And both of those, I guess, and this is, I think even on issues where I think I didn't get it right and I misjudged things and I made some missteps, I kind of still stand by the fundamental decisions I took. I might have been able to handle it better, or in the case of the post-Brexit period, saying that I wanted to go for another referendum, I think the timing of that turned out to be wrong, largely because of Theresa May's snap general election. So, it's interesting thinking.
No, I thought you were saying. I thought you said in the book though is that you misjudged kind of the middle.
Yeah,
ground of Scottish
I did.
opinion.
I think at that point, because not everybody, but the mood post Brexit was so horrified at the fact Scotland had voted against Brexit, but we were going to be taking out the EU, and there was a significant chunk of people who'd voted no in the independence referendum who were horrified at what was happening around Brexit. And I think, well, I don't think, I'm pretty certain, and I say it in the book, I assumed that they would be, I guess, quicker to sort of sign up to independence than would be the case. And I didn't properly, I think, appreciate the sense of everything was up in the air after Brexit. There was a sense of chaos and uncertainty. And even amongst people who were horrified at what was happening, there was maybe, well, firstly, a sense of, is this the time to add upheaval to chaos, which is how many would have seen it.
That's the phrase in the book. I remember, yeah.
And secondly, and this is where I think it was, it was not true of me, but I understand why some people might have thought it, that I was trying to, weaponise Brexit or use it for selfish partisan purposes. When in actual fact, I was horrified at the idea we were losing European membership. And yes, I've supported independence all my life, but in the wake of that, thought it was really important to give people a choice, whether they wanted to take that choice or not, to give people, do we want to be part of Brexit Britain, or do we want to see if there's another avenue?
And then on the gender certificates, and people be able to apply for one themselves rather than going through a horrible, convoluted process, you basically say you maybe should have paused that legislation when it became clear how controversial it was.
I think there's two things I reflect on. Yeah, and even before that. So and this is a bit that's really, forgotten now. When that was first mooted in the 2016 Scottish election, it wasn't controversial. There was cross-party consensus. Scotland wasn't doing something that hadn't been done before. Many other countries had gone down this road. Our closest neighbour, Ireland, had this on the statute book. So it was something that most politicians were signed up to. And I think at that point, that perhaps blinded me to the concerns that may start to emerge. And I possibly didn't engage enough in the substance of those concerns to try to allay them. And then secondly, when much, much later, it became so toxic and so polarised and so divisive, not in the sense of saying I'm wrong and I shouldn't do this, but in the sense of, okay, right, let's take a step back and see if we can, as I fervently believe we should be able to, reconcile the rights and of women. I'm a feminist to my core, with the desire, I think the rightful desire, to allow trans people to live with dignity. Let's take a step back and see if actually we can take the heat out of this and find a way forward that satisfies both of those things. And I think if there was one, if I was able to wind the clock back and do one thing differently, then I think that might be it.
Do you think you'd still be First Minister?
No, because
actually it was other things that
I'd got to the end of my time as First Minister and I was exhausted. COVID, more than anything, I'm not saying it was the only thing, but I'd been First Minister for about 8.5 years. The couple of years of COVID, the intense couple of years of COVID, made that feel much longer. And I was done. I was, physically, mentally exhausted, and that's what brought me to the end of the road. I mean, if the trans debate played a part at all, and I think I say this in the book, it became almost an illustration of the polarisation of politics. And I had started to think that I was, I was coming to represent that kind of polarisation. People in Scotland either loved me or loathed me, and there was kind of very few people in the middle. Now, after so long in office, the fact that so many people still supported me, if I may say so, I think was quite an achievement. But there weren't
That's
many
one of the less
people.
modest bits of the book when you say that.
I mean, I'm allowed a bit of. You said I've criticised myself on the page,
true,
so I
true.
feel that I need to But yeah, so that's why. So no, if I had done what I now think I maybe should have done, it wouldn't have changed the trajectory of my first ministership.
Talking of COVID, I mean, one of the last high-profile things lots of people have seen you do was the appearance at the COVID inquiry, where you broke down in tears. Just explain why that's how you felt at that point.
I had spent, it was the type of politician I was and still am. I'd spent so long preparing for that appearance, reading back through all of the briefings and all of the material that I'd looked at the time, and thinking so deeply about all the decisions I'd taken, the ones I thought were right, the ones that with hindsight maybe weren't. But I don't think I'd properly prepared myself for the emotional impact of sitting in an inquiry, and I'm not criticising the inquiry, but having put to me, I think I describe it this way in the book, all the kind of worst caricatures of myself, that I'd been, taking decisions for political reasons, or I'd been trying to sort of make Scotland more distinct to serve the independence cause, or I'd been a control freak. I did my best in COVID, and like leaders everywhere, I didn't get everything right. But I absolutely, and I can hand on heart say this, I did my best every single day. So to have that sort of come at me, I hadn't appreciated just how that would make me feel. I'd been through, a pretty torrid time in the months leading up to that. I had worried that I might kind of start to or get emotional, but in that moment, I honestly, it wasn't just the breaking down and starting to cry. In that moment, I was really worried that I wasn't going to be able to stop crying, and it was just such a raw moment. And yeah, it was a tough one.
I mean, you say you were on the verge of a breakdown.
That was, the period since standing down, and obviously lots of difficult stuff had happened. That was my lowest moment in the sense, and it was accumulation, no doubt. It wasn't, if everything else hadn't happened, maybe that wouldn't have had this effect on me, but it just in that moment felt I was very, very close to the edge. I just lost all sense of perspective, all sense of who I was, and I was in a really bad state, and I, for the first and only time in my life, actually went for some counselling because I felt I needed something to just help me regain that sense of equilibrium and perspective on life.
Yeah, and I obviously won't go into the details of that because that's totally private, but I'm just wondering what's it like when you've been First Minister and you walk into a room and you sit on a sofa and you speak to a council. I mean, that's not how leaders normally do things, is it?
I don't know. I mean, I suspect, and I have no knowledge of this, I suspect maybe more people do it than admit to doing it, because it is such a private thing. There is a school of thought that we should all do it more and be just a bit more open about emotions and feelings. But it was a friend who kind of persuaded me to do it, and I'm one of these people that I'm never going to do that, but I'm glad I did it. And actually it didn't take that long. It just being able to talk through how I was feeling about things with somebody who wasn't part and parcel of it, who didn't know all the ins and outs, really, really helped me. And so thankfully, reasonably quickly, I managed to kind of regain a firmer footing on life, but it wasn't a pleasant period.
And going back to the actual COVID period itself, and I don't want to dwell on something that's obviously quite traumatic for you, but I think the detail that stuck out for me in the book was you look back at the old clips and you think I look really thin because I wasn't eating, and it's like your colleague's wife was basically sending you tins of soup or flasks of soup.
Yeah, so I do.
And you had to have a strategy to make sure you would eat the soup.
I was
during the height of the COVID
crisis.
Great,
private secretaries and everything who were trying to look after me and make sure. But it was, Jean Freeman, who was the Scottish Health Secretary at the time, her partner also happens to be one of my oldest friends. And she was working from home, Susan, working from home, and was making homemade soup. And so sent, flasks of soup in every day with Jean. And and insisted that Jean take her the empty flask home at night
to prove
that I'd eaten it. So that, more than anything, made me eat. And I would sort of come up to my office after doing the daily media briefing that I did, and I would have the soup. But yeah, it was, I often think that was a really tough period in my professional life, the toughest period. But I often think, compared to people who are working on the front line of the NHS or doing all these other really difficult jobs, it wasn't the most difficult job in the country. So trying to keep that sense of perspective and balance about it is important.
And also, it's interesting you talk about the daily briefings. You say that was so useful for you in terms of actually leading, because it meant you had to ask yourself all those questions that we would be asking you to work out what you thought.
Yeah, I mean, I'd been health secretary in Scotland during the swine flu pandemic. So I'd had some experience of trying to kind of level with people and be open and give information just to allow people to know what was happening. And I took that into the COVID pandemic with me. But initially, I didn't really understand how important that was going to be. For me, as you say, and I say in the book, it gave me a kind of central point in the day. It meant I had to be across everything. I had to absolutely know the answers to the questions people were asking, but it also gave me a platform to I suppose just talk openly to the public, to bring people into the room of the decision, to say, this is not an exact science. We don't know everything. Our knowledge is developing. We're having to take decisions based on partial information. We might not always get it right. And I found that to be a really helpful way of doing my job. And I think it might have been a few weeks after starting to do these, I started to get emails from people because everybody was sitting at home. I had a captive audience, literally a captive audience. But people would email me to say that they were finding it really helpful because it was giving structure to their day. It was allowing them to feel less powerless. And to this day, and this is not an exaggeration, there's certainly not a week goes by that somebody doesn't mention these briefings to me in the context of, that really helped me through what was a really difficult time. So
that happens with this podcast as well, because that's when we kind of started doing it every day. Is it weird for you, because the whole, the world has sort of moved on from COVID, and people, what's it called, the memory hole, people have sort of shoved it and repressed it and sort of moved on, but actually it still feels like it was quite vivid for you. Do you feel like a weird sort of disconnect?
I think I'm somewhere in the middle, because I find I've got a real, and I think probably everybody feels this to some extent, I've got a really warped sense of time now, because in one sense it feels like, a lifetime ago. In another sense it feels as if it was only last year. I don't relive it every day in a detailed sense. Obviously the inquiries, I say plural because there's a separate Scottish one, are ongoing, so at times I'm having to relive it for the purposes of the inquiries. But yeah, I guess I'm not that different from other people. It happened, it was deeply traumatic, it was really, really difficult. But I think there's a sense of, okay, we don't want to think about it every day. I think what I think about more now is the longer term impacts that I don't think we've even begun to really properly comprehend. The impact on young people who had their education disrupted, or who didn't have social interaction.
Well, no, if it turns out a whole generation is being kind of ruined because you shut the schools, how would you feel then? I
think that is putting it too.
I know, I'm being deliberately provocative.
But I feel the responsibility of all of these decisions. I've just said I don't, and I try not to think about it every day, and I don't think about it every day, but when you put it to me like that, it brings it all back.
Yeah.
All of these decisions were so horrendous. And the thing is, every decision, every way you could have gone, they would have been horrendous in one way. There were no good decisions to be taken. So yeah, I feel responsible, a sense of responsibility for the impact on young people. There are all sorts of ways in which I think we're still living with the legacy of that. But I come back to, I took the very best decisions I could at the time based on everything we knew. If I could turn the clock back, with everything we now know and apply it then, no doubt we'd take lots of different decisions, but that's not the position we were in.
Lockdown a week earlier or something.
Yeah, totally. I've been pretty open about that.
You've said that, yeah. Right. We have to talk about Alex Salmond. who is on something like 176 pages of this book. I
I
just
should
did the
say it's
control
more
out.
than 400 pages, so it's not.
Well, true, but that's still quite a lot of pages.
He was
That's
a
lot-
big.
that's-
He was a big figure in my life.
well,
For good,
yeah.
for much of it as well.
Well, it's interesting because you keep on talking about how you were really close and you were a real partnership, and you kind of loved him in a colleague way, but actually, all the examples you give of his behaviour are him not behaving that well or not being that great a friend.
I think I give other examples as well. Like, when he was running for leader the second time and I was running to be his deputy, he was really, really kind to me during that period. And, it was much newer an experience to me than it was to him. When we were first elected to government, there was a kind of closeness between us. But, when you're in a relationship like that with a personality like him, and I tried not to rewrite history, but I'm only human. Maybe what happened means that the memories of the more difficult things are stronger in my mind than they might have been otherwise.
Yeah, I just wonder, is it just it's not cool now to say nice things about Alex Salmond?
No, I do say nice things about him.
True.
In my book,
I just feel in my mind,
nice
my memories
about
of reading the book, which was yesterday, is that it's pretty negative about him, and there's less of the good stuff about him in there.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's fair, and maybe that's just kind of where my mind is at. But it was really difficult, and I say this in the book, that one of the things that I find and have found hardest to come to terms with about what happened and the breakdown of a relationship that was so central to my life is that, when I think back on all the biggest successes and happiest moments in my life, he is integral to all, well, not to all of them, but to many of them. And it's really hard because of what happened now not to feel that they've been a little bit tainted. And that's been a tough thing to come. And I'm not sure I have yet come to terms with that. I'm hoping that with the passage of time that will change, but I don't know.
Because it's hard to even know what questions to ask because because it's such a dramatic story, the relationship between you two. It's almost like maybe it needs to be a play rather than.
I really hope not.
We'll see.
I really hope not.
Tickets available now, selling out fast. Because it's things like there's some moments where it just feels really like vivid and theatrical. Like there's that night where you're in Butte House, so you're HQ. You're agonising over what the position should be on a second independence referendum. You call him in for advice, and he basically just quotes this poem at you over and over again about just be brave.
Yeah,
and you're like, where's the advice here?
Yeah, I know. I think that was very Alec. Just in those moments, just when it was, wasn't quite that when he was the one having to take the decisions, and I think at that point he wasn't leader anymore. I think there was an element of, he was maybe playing a bit to the sort of gallery and the suggestion that we'd be independent if I was just a bit braver was already a bit of a theme between us. But yeah, I mean, in that moment, I just remember feeling that night just so lonely, actually, because it was a really big decision that was weighing on my shoulders. I wasn't expecting him to take it for me, but I thought, well, I can talk it through with him, and then that's just not what happened. And yeah, it was one of many moments where the loneliness, the cliched loneliness of leadership definitely came home to me.
Well, that's because you're very reflective about your own kind of personality and people's versions of you as well. And one of the criticisms that you address is that you did things by yourself and you didn't involve enough people, but you explain why that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that criticism is both fair and unfair, if that can be true. I'm an introvert. I'm quite an insular person when I'm thinking through things. I also, and I think this should be seen as more of a good thing than a bad thing. As a leader, I always believe very strongly the buck stopped with me. So it was really important that I was comfortable with the decisions I was taking. I'd thought them through so that if it all went disastrously wrong, I had nobody else to blame but myself.
But to other people that
seemed as if I was just, taking everything into myself. It's not fair. Well, two things. I didn't literally do it all by myself. I did take advice. I did speak to people. Ultimately, though, I kind of took the responsibility in my own shoulders. I think the other way in which it's not fair is, and this is true in so many different respects, that things that in men, like what we've just described there in a guy would be strong, decisive leadership.
Maybe.
Yeah, I think because Alec was a bit like that as well. I mean, he would hold court and talk to a lot of people, but on most things, fundamentally, ultimately, it was what he said that went, kind of thing. So, but some things that are in men seen as strengths and attributes, so often in women they're seen almost as character flaws. So there's a bit of unfairness there, but I am what I am.
I want to come on to your introversion in a second, but just sticking with Alex Salmond for a second, there's an amazing line in the book that I will be quoting for months to come, where you've spent ages preparing this huge big white paper about what an independent Scotland might look like. And it's like 600 questions answered about what an independent Scotland would look like. And you're trying to get him to read it and comment on the draft and chip in. But he goes on a trade delegation to China and promises to read it on the plane. And you say, and I think this is almost exactly word for word, that's a good intention. I suspected would not survive the first contact with the first glass of in-flight champagne.
And I think I was right.
Yeah. I mean, that makes me think that was he ever right to be the First Minister and have that much power? Yeah, but if he doesn't do the work and he'd rather drink a glass of champagne than read a document about the future of the nation, that's bad.
Yeah, I mean, so again, contrary to what you just said, I'm about to launch into defending him, which maybe I shouldn't do. He would be brilliant on so much, and he was a big picture guy, and few people I've met in my entire lifetime that could articulate a big, powerful vision more strongly than he could. Things he was interested in, he would absolutely get into the detail of them, but on things either that he wasn't interested in or that he just preferred to leave to somebody else, and that would tend to be me, or on some things John Swinney, then he could be like that. On the referendum, and I don't actually mean this as a criticism of him, he didn't engage properly in the referendum campaign until pretty late in the day, and I think there was a bit of fear on his part that was very uncharacteristic. We were all kind of nervous and frightened. This was a massive thing we were doing. We'd all been working for it for all our lives, so I think there was a bit of kind of just shying away from it a little bit, and on the white paper he definitely left the heavy lifting of it to me.
And also just that the last thing we'll say about him in this conversation is you say that you did experience a kind of grief when your friendship ended. Yeah,
I went through what I think I can only describe as a grieving process. I was completely, I don't know, just I had this sense of disorientation, this person that had always been there, that even although in the latter stages when I was First Minister and he was no longer leader, we weren't speaking to each other as often as we once had. We had gone fairly lengthy periods without much contact, but he was always there, and somebody that, for better or worse, whether he was helpful or not, I could pick up the phone to. And suddenly he wasn't, and it was more than that. He was suddenly my arch enemy, and I just went through this. I say it in the book, I used to have really vivid dreams where we were back as we once were, and I would wake up, and that way you wake up from a dream and you wonder if it's, and I would have this momentary, everything was fine, and then I'd remember it was a dream, and I would just feel utterly bereft and sad and just, and so I did, and I thought I had got over that. I thought I had got to a point of feeling nothing, just being not at peace with it, but having come to terms with it. And then when he died, I got a call that night just before it broke publicly from Ian Blackford, and I just was hit by that all over again, and for quite some time after it, I was just back in that sense of grief and loss and sadness. And
then you sort of end that chapter. I mean, he's throughout the book, but there's a particular chapter, and you sort of end by saying that he'd sort of bought this conspiracy theory about what had happened with him and the Scottish government and those claims of sexual harassment against him. But that could take hours to unravel all of that. Talking of other famous Scots, Sean Connery. Tell me about Sean Connery's trademark voice training course.
Yeah, I mean, that's got to count as one of the more surreal episodes of my life. It was back in 2004 when I was, for a brief period, running to be leader of the SNP, and then Alec came back in and I ran to be his deputy. But Sean had been in Edinburgh and had asked if I would go and see him, and I went along to the New Club, which is, one of these old private member clubs in Edinburgh, and had this one-to-one session with Sean, where he said that he thought I could do with deepening my voice in interviews, and he was going to teach me how to do it. So basically, it consisted of me with a rolled up bit of paper between my teeth,
right,
where he gave me things to say.
Right. Which makes you sound like Sean Connery, ironically.
Well, and it kind of, and he said this is how he'd sort of learned to deepen his voice in acting. And it worked while I was doing it. I mean, at first I'm like, is he taking the piss here? Is this just like some... Sorry, I've sworn on the BBC.
No, it's fine. It's a podcast.
Yeah, is this been recorded? Am I being sort of pranked here? But then, it started to work. But it's not the kind of thing, it's the kind of thing I guess does work when you're filming, scenes as an actor. But, sitting in a television interview with my teeth clamped together,
Or at First Minister's Questions.
Even if I'd remember to do it, it would have looked a bit odd.
Then another famous Scot, JK Rowling. I'm just going to read what you say in the book, and then you can explain what you mean. And this is about in the battle over gender recognition. And you say the tactics deployed by some, however sincere their views might have been, suggested that there was another agenda at work. There are many examples I could cite, but the one that attracted most attention, not surprisingly, was J.K. Rowling's donning of a T-shirt bearing the slogan, "Sturgeon, Destroyer of Women's Rights." I obviously don't know what her intentions were, but it seems blindingly obvious that a stunt like that was never going to elevate the debate or illuminate the issues at the heart of it. What are you actually accusing J.K. Rowling of there? And that's very carefully worded, I realise.
I think what I'm saying is it went beyond she absolutely fundamentally, passionately disagrees with me on the issue of trans rights, and I disagree with her. And that is, absolutely, fine. That's democracy. That's life. I accept that. And she argues her case. I argue mine. But I think to use language that was really personal, and I was the First Minister at the time, I was expected robust scrutiny and, robust criticism. I'm no, sort of shrinking violet in these things, but to use language that was so personal and so, it seemed to me, quite incendiary, not just Nicola Sturgeon wrong on this issue, but destroying women's rights. And I don't know, and I say I don't know what her intentions are, maybe to get a headline, maybe it was no more than that. What I do know is that the impact of that was certainly, you could probably go online and see the kind of abuse that brought down on me. I think there was a before that statement and an after that statement in terms of the vitriol of what came. And I am not saying that I should have been immune to really sharp criticism, really tough criticism, but it seemed to me that the before and after that statement was quite stark. Yeah. And I just think everybody in any debate, particularly on this, and I'm sure I've been guilty in the past of using language that, if I look at it now, I think maybe that was a bit too heated or that language wasn't appropriate. But I just think in the climate we live in now, the social media frenzies we live in now, I think we've all got a responsibility. If there's a choice to be made between dialing or, sort of lifting the temperature and lowering the temperature, I think we've maybe all got a responsibility to slightly lower it.
One of the other things that I'll take away from this book is just how candid you are about your life, like as a person, like what you're going through. And it's things like going through the menopause, which I'll never experience, but while running a country. Like what does going through the menopause while running a country actually mean in practice? Help me out, help me understand.
When I got to the point of thinking I was in the early stages of the menopause, well, the thing that most terrified me was when I was on my feet in the Chamber of Parliament at First Minister's Questions, and I would find myself like struggling to remember a word, and I could feel myself like starting to sort of, my heart would race, and like this would be just mortifying to like forget my words in the Chamber of the Scottish Parliament. So, and I remember thinking somebody must have gone through this before me and spoken about it, and the fact is, unless I've missed them, nobody had. And I'm not criticising the likes of Angela Merkel or Hillary Clinton, both women I hugely admire, but they must have gone through it in sort of positions of office or responsibility, but had never spoken about it. So I guess I wanted to speak about it more openly to try to demonstrate that you can do big jobs while going through this, but there are things you have to think about, and there are things you've got to be conscious about in order to cope with it and manage it.
And also, you write very movingly about your miscarriage, but also that's within the context of you not being sure that you wanted to have a child anyway. It's a very, very conflicted emotional time for you, that period, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that I still struggle to really reconcile all the conflicting emotions I had back then. I had never and never have had this overwhelming desire to have a child. If I could turn the clock back and have a child, I would do it, but only on the condition I could still do everything else I'd done. I never had this, I must be a mother. But when we got to a point of, I was 40, let's try and have and then I got pregnant more quickly than I had thought I would. And I would have been, had the pregnancy continued, I would have been 6 months pregnant at the 2011 Scottish election. And I mean, it's hard to believe this now, but back then there hadn't been women in senior office who'd had kids. It wasn't clear what the public reaction would have been. So I was suddenly consumed by this fear and guilt. Was I jeopardising the party's election prospects? Was I jeopardising my own? How would I cope? What if I had terrible morning sickness? And so I just was so ambivalent about it. And the thing after the miscarriage, and I still feel a sense of this today, I just had this, on some days I had the feeling that I wish I wasn't pregnant at all. And after the miscarriage, I just felt, was that my punishment for not wanting it enough? I think any woman, I don't know, I guess any woman who's been through that, I think there's still a sense of miscarriages are not that big a deal, but they really are, and physically as well as emotionally. But yeah, I still carry a little bit of that. Was it my fault that I miscarried because I didn't want it enough?
Because you were worried about how it would affect the elections.
Yeah.
Then, when you were a much younger politician and you just entered the Scottish Parliament, there was this case of bullying, and by another MSP, and I'll just read it out because I want to get the words right and I don't want to paraphrase it. And it says, "At some stage over this first time of Parliament, this person started calling me Nasher, both to other people and occasionally to my face. At first, I didn't understand it. Eventually, I discovered it was a reference to a story being spread around that I'd once injured a boyfriend during oral sex." And that's basically how you describe. I mean, and then you talk about going and crying in the toilets. I mean, I don't really know where to start with that. But when did you realise that was? It wasn't until years later you realised that was a case of bullying.
Yeah, it was when I.
It wasn't
I
at
remember
the time.
Exactly at the
you
time. I just thought
it
was just the cut and thrust of politics. It was just the kind of stuff you had to put up with. I was mortified and felt it was somehow. It was my shame, not the shame of the guy who was. I don't know whether he started the rumour or just, enjoyed and indulging in it. But it wasn't until, and I remember it vividly, in the wake of the Me Too stuff, the Scottish Parliament did a survey of all its staff and members, and
so that was basically about 10 years later.
Yeah, and there was questions about, have you ever, had any instances of sexual bullying or sexual, and it was sitting there, and I was about to tick no. And then this came into my head and I thought, actually, I have. That was an instance of bullying of an overtly sexual nature. It was designed to make a young woman feel what it did, make me feel ashamed and embarrassed and a bit scared of the person who was doing this. But it took me that long to actually see it for what I now think it was.
And I mean, you don't name the person, but it's now quite likely the papers will chase after who this is and they'll get named. Is that?
I don't know. That may happen. I did thought, and I still think, was I cowardly not naming him? But I don't want to feel, because I suspect, knowing what this guy was like, I suspect he just. Do you know what? I suspect there's part of him would enjoy the notoriety of it.
Really?
And that's what I just couldn't really bring myself to indulge for him.
Can you imagine behaviour like that still happening in the Scottish Parliament? Because politics is different from a normal workplace.
I would love to say no, I can't imagine it, and I don't know that it would happen in quite that way, quite that explicitly. But can I sit here and say no, I can't imagine instances of of sexual bullying happening. Unfortunately, I can't say that.
And then throughout your career, there's been rumours about your sexuality, and you address that, and you talk about that weird period where there's a rumour you were having an affair with like the French ambassador in Edinburgh, and everyone remembers.
I mean, it did make my life sound a lot more glamorous than it actually was at the time.
But then you talk about, and it's slightly cryptic, you say in the book, long-term relationships with men have accounted for more than 30 years of my life, but I've never considered sexuality, my own included, to be binary. I mean, what are you getting at there?
I'm not. I know I'll be asked this question, and actually, I'm not really getting it more than what I say there. That's how I see life. And to say that's how I see life for other people, but not for myself, would have seemed a bit dishonest. I don't think sexuality is binary. And that's just basically. And
I mean, are you coming out?
No, I'm not. I'm not making a big revelation. I'm not trying to stick a label on myself. I'm just saying that's how I. And there are people who will say, "Oh, I don't think that at all. That's not how sexuality is. It's how I see it. It's how I've always seen it." And that's basically what I'm saying. But I suppose I'm doing something else. And I can't remember if you read out the next bit. And this has been my choosing. I'm not complaining about it. I've lived under the spotlight for so long. And I guess people would say I'm writing a book, so I'm clearly
putting yourself in the spotlight.
Happy to keep myself in the spotlight, and that's fair and true. But there is an element here, I suppose, that I'm trying to slightly redraw the boundaries of the kind of public-private selves. I do think personal sexual relationships should be private, and whether or not I succeed, I don't know, but I'm going to try, I think, and just slightly redraw the boundaries of that for the rest of
yeah, because I was thinking about that quite a lot this morning. I was like, am I allowed to ask Nicola Sturgeon if she's like bi or queer or whatever label you could pluck from the
I'm not using any.
But actually what you just said there is very interesting, because actually, you're drawing a line under that now, because whatever you do in whatever aspect of your personal life is now going to be personal.
I want to try, and I don't get me wrong, I understand that because of what I've done in the past, the job I've done, that I've put myself in the public eye, that I've written a book, so I'm continuing to put myself in the public eye. I absolutely get that there will be people who are interested and want to know, and I'm not complaining about any of that. But I think it's not about me saying, I'm entitled to a completely private life and I don't expect people to ask me questions. I think it's me saying, right, okay, the boundary's been over here for so long. I just want to move it a bit and reclaim for myself a bit of a private life where I don't have to answer questions about what I'm getting up to in my personal life all the time.
So it sounds to me there won't be a Frankly 2. Well, let's
see how well Frankly 1 does. You never know.
You say, actually, you are tempted to sort of get involved in politics in a sort of more general way. I mean, did I misinterpret that? Like, you are weighing up how you could intervene in the world to make the world a better place in future.
I mean, that makes it sound very grand. I'm not trying to.
As I was saying, I was like, she's not going to like this.
Kofi Annan of, I think the world was beyond.
I was just trying to get at maybe a less traditional political role.
I'm trying to work that out myself just now. I don't, I'm. Within a few months, I will no longer, for the first time since I was, in my late 20s, I will no longer be an elected politician. And I'm looking forward to that. It will be a change and a wrench in some ways. And I don't see myself ever fighting an election again. But as I say in the book, and it's not designed to sort of tease people or anything. You never know what lies ahead. I've learned that in the last couple of years. But I still care passionately about the world, about my country, about democracy, about all of the issues that have been very close to my heart throughout my entire political career. And so I don't think I know I'm not going to stop caring about these things, and I don't think I'm going to never speak about them again, or never have an opinion, or never want to express an opinion or try to influence things. But what form that takes in the future, I haven't really decided yet what I want.
And also, you can imagine living abroad at some point. So the idea of Nicola Sturgeon not living in Scotland, that just seems like, what?
Yeah, I mean, not forever, and possibly not for very long. I belong in Scotland; it's my home. But I think being physically out of Scotland for a might just help to reset my perspective, and to be more selfish about it, just remove me a little bit from that kind of goldfish bowl scrutiny that I still live under in Scotland. Again, that I don't mean that as a complaint. It's just the reality that, you know, Scotland's quite a small country. It's quite a small body politic, and I still, sometimes it feels, and this is very subjective, that I just have to breathe the wrong way and somebody's writing a story about it. So removing myself from that.
Well, like your driving lessons got filmed by the news. That's what
and other things were happening at the point. But yeah, I literally had to drive away on camera when I was going for my driving license. So yeah, it does sometimes feel very suffocating, is maybe putting it too strongly, but I feel sometimes that I can't breathe freely in Scotland. So yeah, maybe not abroad. You know,
England?
I love London. England is not yet a foreign country, would never be a foreign country, obviously, even when we're independent.
Obviously, there's Wales and Northern Ireland too.
Indeed. But, this may shock many people to hear, but I love London. I'm just, for one thing and another, I'm spending a reasonable amount of time in London at the moment. So, yeah, maybe a bit of time down here, and who knows? You know what? The thing that I find most energising is just that sense of who knows. And for the first time in a long time, I can please myself. Sounds too selfish, but I can sort of build and shape a life that makes me happy.
And that's why reading this book is like quite a thrilling experience as a journalist, because
can I have that for the
I don't know if I'm allowed. Am I allowed?
Thrilling experience
for the paperback. Well, yeah, because it's like you don't get this from politicians' books. Normally, it's like a list of the summits that they went to, and you do some of that, and the policies that they liked, and knifing their enemies. And actually, you're just a lot more candid about everything. And I just wonder, though, it's like the big thing I come away from it thinking is looking at the younger you, where you just threw yourself into politics and you say, I didn't give myself time to like develop as a person. Yeah. And then you talk about the fact that actually you're quite an introvert. But I remember covering that election campaign when like your face was on the side of a helicopter. And I remember just thinking, oh,
I remember thinking,
this must be really, really stressful.
There was a time
to have to live a life that's not necessarily who you are.
Yeah. I mean, it was who I don't want to say it was, but
and it's not a sob
it's this
story.
kind of almost this kind of two parts of myself. And around that time of the face on the helicopter, I remember, and I found it really hard to find the way of describing it in the book because they didn't sound cliched and trite, but it was like almost an out of body experience. I'd watched this version of myself, thinking, "Who the hell is she?" And it just was a bit odd at times. So it wasn't that it wasn't me, it was just a version of myself that didn't always sit comfortably with the kid that hid under the table at our birthday party reading a book. But I don't put it this way in the book, and there's a bit of me just now that wonders if I've kind of lived my life back to front a little bit, that I've done all the really serious kind of stuff at a very young age. And now I'm going into sort of, this quote is really going to come back to haunt me, right? Delayed adolescence and sort of, I can do all the things I wanted to do.
And then last question, this is a very philosophical... Actually, you know what? That's just reminded me of a time I was filming with you in Dumfries. I can't remember what election it was. And you were planting a tree and we were all filming it. And you said, I bet you're all going to come back in a year's time and see if it's dead. And I haven't
the number of trees I've planted over the course of my political career, it would be, please don't go and check how many of them are still alive.
But last question, it's a really philosophical one, so it's like a huge one to end on. But I wonder, are we getting to a world now where being a leader, whether it's of Scotland or the UK or the United Nations or wherever, is now so hard, like the number of people who could ever do it well is just dwindling, and we've got to a place where we'll get to a point where no one's cut out to ever be Prime Minister ever again because it's too hard. Because the demand.
I hope we don't get there, but I do worry that's where we're headed. I think, and I'm going to generalise here just for the purposes of the argument, but I really worry, and I think this is particularly the case with younger women who just see politics as, well, why would I put myself through some of this? But I really worry that the state of democracy and discourse, all the things we've been sort of touching on, is such right now that anybody who would be in politics for the right reasons thinks that's not for me and pull back. And as that happens, we basically just free up the ground for all the wrong people, the people who actually thrive on that kind of discourse. And so, yeah, I do think that that's where we're heading. The big question, and I don't know the answer to it, is can we get things back on the right track? And I don't know.
Because I was just wondering it just from a purely like practical, logistical thing, that the amount of work people are expected to do and issues they're meant to juggle, and the fact that you can't have a break, whether actually just on a human physical level, governing becomes impossible.
I think there's I think there's so many different layers to that question. I mean, I think the speed of and news, and you'll have seen this over your career, but I remember when the SNP got its first fax machine, and press releases had been posted out before that, and then the fax machine, and then there was, you remember the kind of Tony Blair era where everybody was concerned about page, but also the sort of soundbite on television that was distorting debate, and now we're 240 characters, but I think the point I'm making is, in the earlier days of my political career, a story would break on a morning or whatever, and you would have a reasonable period of time to think about it, get the facts, decide what your response was going to be, and as long as you had something out for the lunchtime news or the 6 o'clock news, that was fine. Today it's like a story breaks, and literally within minutes you've got people in your profession sort of, why hasn't this leader X, whoever it happens to be, said something, they're stalling. And so the pressure to decide things instantaneously before you've got all the facts at your fingertip, that's distortive. And then there's just the inability, I think, to draw the lines between personal and professional. And so and then there's all the abuse that gets hurled at politicians these days. So yeah, I do think it's getting harder to attract good, and good's a very subjective word, obviously, but good people into politics, and that's why there are so many of the people I would describe as the wrong people to have in politics.
Some of them you call them odious, for example.
Positions. Who do I call
my
them?
last favourite quote from the book before we wrap up is the election slogan Alex Salmond comes up with, which is more gnats, less cuts. And you agree with the idea, but you're just like, it's grammatically offensive because it should be fewer cuts. She was an author even then.
We had that debate around a table, and anyway, I couldn't come up with a better one, and I knew what he was trying to get at. But all through that election campaign, I sort of died inside a little bit every time I had to see it.
No, actually, this is just a little bonus extra because Nicola Sturgeon has just revealed to me one of the things that makes her a delayed teenager. She's got a tattoo. Now, the great thing is this podcast is visualised. So if you hold up your wrist, how would you describe that?
It is, well, I know what it means, and I'm not going to get into the detail. It's meant to be a kind of statement of resilience.
This is the new privacy.
But it is it's a sort of infinity symbol with an arrow at the end of it.
Okay. You going to get any more?
Don't know.
Interesting. Non-denial denial. Yeah. Or just doesn't know. Nicola, thank you.
Thank you.